now I'm going to go over all the managers and singletons that make my game work. To begin with, I have a manager class. Manager class actually contains all the singletons in the game, so which include the game controller, the score, sound, wave, mushroom factory, enemy factory, and the spawn manager. It doesn't contain the bullet one because it only contains the ship. It's never really used by anyone else ever. And it doesn't control the input one because it's also used by the ship only, ever. I do this so that way I have one singleton that I need to have other places like look at, and that can looks at the other place, and it makes it all nice and easy. This thing controls all the pointers it needs to, so you can call the right things. It does this thing where I do set manager to this, so that all the managers have a thing back to this like major control singleton. Because if you have, the control manager get the instance of this when inside of its initialization, this does that, and then it just starts looping indefinitely, and system explodes. So this gets around that. Okay, here's the game controller. The game controller basically is the whole thing that I use to dictate what mode the game's in through these attract, players 1, player 2, enums. It also keeps track of who the active player is in these situations, and then it basically, through this set mode call, turns off the sound. For instance, if you want to set up a tractor, you turn off the sound, set the wave to a tractor wave. It controls the ship as well, maintains all that, so there's one ship. Sets it in the false, it's not active anymore. Then it resets it, and then it sets in a tractor if needed, a tractor controller, and then it sets up the HUD accordingly, and then then once all these things are in place, then you got a tractor mode. The right call, and then you do players 1, and then sets the active player to 1. It resets and does all the proper things, turns the sound on, all that, starts the wave, and then sets up the HUD, and then you have player 1 mode, and does the same for player 2. And of course, the active players will be player 1, because player 1 always will start first. It controls when the player dies. It calls this function, which goes through, checks the mode, checks the active player, adjusts lives and the score, and therefore the HUD properly, moves the player off the screen, because when the player's dead, he's dead. But even though I'm recycling the same ship, so it's never actually dead. Clears the enemies, begins the repair cycle that I explained earlier with the mushroom field. When the mushrooms are done being repaired, they call this repairs complete. It will check if there's a winner, because there's no more waves left. Otherwise, it'll go through and it'll check, is it player 1, do the right thing depending on how many lives are left. It's player 2, 2 players, do the right things if there's no lives left. Or if it's a tractor, then just keep doing a tractor. This is just the call I make if there's no more winner. It just sets everything in the right motion for if there's no more waves left. Also, game controller just happens to initiate the grid and keeps track of that kind of stuff. And that is it for the game controller. It basically just controls which mode's active and sets everything out, all the other systems in the proper motion to account for this. The wave manager manages the waves that you see in the game. It does a text read I use streams in this case to get line and all that stuff, and then it sets up an array of waves depending on the number from the text file. So it'll take in number waves 4, and then it'll set up the fields based on the mushroom count, which will store, and then it'll read in all this data to set up the array of waves properly. And then when the wave increments, it'll just read from if it's now wave 2, it'll read the wave, the proper wave from the array based on the current wave. I have tractor. Tractor just sets it all up, so that's a tractor mode. And then here's the normal one, which is start wave. Start wave is it's called initially, and then every time you kill all the centipedes, increment waves called, increments the waves, and then calls start wave or winner, depending on if that's the case. Otherwise, and if it's start wave, then it'll go through, and then activate, deactivate them. Like if there's no field, create a field. And if there is a field, activate and deactivate it. When everything's said and done, all the fields are destroyed. So that way, in the next game, next time you do 2-player mode, 1-player mode, whatever, you get new fields. Spawn heads, alternate sides to spawn, like the additional smaller heads. Set up the scorpion. All this is set up, as you can see, based off of the data from the wave that I read in earlier. And yeah, clean for attractor. See, this is the thing that I call right at the end, which when you're switching back to attractor mode, to make sure everything's nice and neat. And, the waves are, the wave number, the current waves, all that stuff is proper. The fields are zeroed out, deleted, etc. Spawn manager. Spawn manager is super important because it basically maintains all the spawns. It doesn't have an update. All it does is when wave manager, it sets manager spawn, set alarm 0, and then using the data from the scorpion spawn. So basically, the wave manager tells the spawn manager, hey, alarm 0, we're going to need to start spawning scorpions. Start doing it. Alarm 1 does spiders. Alarm 2 does heads. And alarm 3 sets up for is with the mushroom factory and spawning fleas. I have a thing that cancels out all the alarms during switches, so you don't have alarms going off and then being reset or weird things like that. I just make sure all the alarms are canceled during switches when needed, and then they restart when they're supposed to. Sound manager. I have a sound manager that loads in all the sounds, and then it's called accordingly from different areas to, like, play shot, play that. So the way I get silence going and turning on and off sound is basically I have this pointer function. So this wave control has a pointer to a function to call, and I call that everywhere. And then when I want to print it, so just by adjusting what this points to, depends on if it will play sound or not. So if sound's on, it'll do the play function from the sound. Otherwise, if it's off, it'll do the stop function, which means nothing will play. And therefore, I have silence when needed just by flipping that on and off. Score manager, it manages the score. It reads in from a high score text and writes to it when the game is over. I go here. Yes, here's the high score text. This is the one it writes to. I also conveniently have a high score clean, so if you ever want to restart, and just make sure all your high scores are back to normal levels from like a first run. You can just copy and paste in there. Yeah, and it writes out there, takes both players' scores, and then sorts them, and then only prints out the 8 of them. So anything, the 2 lower ones will automatically never be printed out, and then they'll never be saved. And then so whenever something dies at the proper places, it calls a score manager set score, and then puts in the enum. So like if a mushroom, call mushroom at the mushroom value, all these values, and then update the scores and stuff appropriately on the HUD. I'd also like to mention that I also have a const values header file. This file is divided up with comments containing enemies, game controller, managers, etc. And it has all the values here nicely listed out that you can adjust on the fly to make the proper changes. Like if I change Scorpion speed to 200, Scorpion move faster. Where the enemies are stored off screen, to keep that organized, helps to see them, like quickly see all that, in case you're getting weird behaviors because things are doing not what they're supposed to off the screen. Adjust timers if you want things to spawn, like go off faster, slower. I have a little thing that adjusts how far the centipede spreads apart based on how fast it sends over the pushes. Okay, the final thing I'll be going over is the HUD and how it's set up. The HUD's using the flyweight system. The HUD Tech CPP controls all the HUDs, all the glyphs that are displayed, and etc., and maintains all that using these functions. Actually, these main 6 are the ones. The tractor will make the HUD display as a tractor mode. P1 is for P1 mode. P2 is for P2. I'm in 2-player mode. Pop-up player pop-up is so you get the player 1, player 2 thing to appear in the middle of the screen during switches. Clear removes everything on it, so that way usually you call clear and then you call one of these, to make a nice clean transition to make everything display well. In order to get collisions with the highest score in the middle, I have basic collision font, which is really just an invisible mushroom actually, because it acts like a mushroom. I figure I might as well use the mushroom texture to make it get the same feel. Set the color to 0 and all that for alphas and all that. So every time I print out one of the glyphs for the high score in the middle and all the high score text, I also print out one of these, and then during the clear, these are all removed. And they are all stored on one list, and that list is just cleared off. Yeah, overall the flyweight system isn't anything spectacular. I could probably have made it, less repetitive. But honestly, keeping it repetitive like this helps me visually organize it in my mind, where things are at. For instance, here I'm high score text. Okay, the high score text is in the middle. That'll be the first one after it. This will be the second one after it, the third, and so on and so forth. It's a little bit more repetitive, but when it comes to the HUD stuff, I kind of like that. Not in other areas, but here I do, just because when you're trying to take numbers and then convert those to positions and draw them and figure out in your mind, it helps. I think that's basically everything in the game. There's only one level ever in my game. I don't use the scene changes or any of that stuff. It's just one continuous level that, the game controller with the actions from the player and the tracking from the wave, the game controller with the wave manager and all that stuff and the current waves and, players' lives properly just keeps recycling and redoing everything accordingly.